So I will play the role of both Councilmember Licata and myself tonight. So Councilmember Licata and I have been doing sort of this two-person roadshow because we are coming up into the end of our budget deliberations, and at that point we'll go back into regular committee sessions. And one of the things that Councilmember Licata and I have been working on the past couple of years is how the city should respond in terms of regulation and overall business authority to a new appearance of a type of business in different areas of the city, and that is medical marijuana dispensaries. So I'm going to hand out, I've got 3 stacks of paper with me. I'm actually going to start just with the frequently asked questions, and if you want the director's report and the draft zoning legislation, I'm delighted to provide it to you, but it has put some people to sleep. So we'll start with this.
I'll take it.
Figure it out. Yeah, you probably would. Exactly. I'll give you the director's report and the legislation.
That'll give me a head up for the end of the month, too, right?
Usually at these meetings there have been a couple of folks from the medical marijuana industry who have also been attending these meetings because they are actually far better able to answer some of the questions that typically come up about why operations in particular ways manifest, or what are the types of rules and concerns and things like that for the business owners.
When there's a section different, that's different.
Yeah, I went ahead and sent down the frequently asked questions and the director's report.
Wait. That's yours?
It is.
That's your sitting back there.
Director's report there.
All right.
She's good at
It is, beware. Do not drive while reading this. So the other thing I'll say right up here at the top is that we did vote as a state to legalize possession and use of marijuana in this state under particular circumstances and obtaining it in particular ways. I don't have a clue about how that's going to affect what we're talking about here tonight, but I don't. Let me start by saying, so just to remind folks, in 1998, the state of Washington took another marijuana-related vote, and we said, hey, we think it's a good idea for patients to have access. We know that we hear and are reading an increasing number of medical studies that marijuana can have some palliative effects, some helpful effects for folks who are suffering from certain types of illnesses. Unfortunately, when we took that vote, we didn't actually say exactly how we wanted that to happen. So we said, we think it's a good idea, we'd like to see this manifest, and check, we were done. So oddly enough, not a lot happened after that because we continue to be contrary to federal law when it comes to marijuana, which is still the Schedule I drug. Is not legal, except for now, in Washington State and in Colorado, in most other circumstances in the United States. And after 1998, again, not a lot happened, and over the past few years, you've seen more happen, and my personal theories on that are that we've had changing attitudes in the country about the war on drugs, whatever you want to call that, access to alternative medicines, and at the same time, we have had the state and some advocates in the state, Senator Jeannie Cole Wells is one in particular, who has recognized that when we took the vote in 1998, we didn't really do patients any favors. We simply said, we want you to have it. We didn't discuss how they were supposed to obtain it. And so we didn't do a heck of a lot for patients who did that. There have been 2 legislative sessions that have gone by now where Senator Cole Wells and others have attempted to come up with a coherent approach to how patients would access medical cannabis. There was one piece of legislation that passed 2 years ago, and the governor vetoed large parts of it. And unfortunately, when that happened, you ended up with a little bit of a Swiss cheese approach, where it made sense as a coherent whole. It started to make a whole heck of a lot less sense for cities when you took out large chunks of it. Last year, they came back and tried to make some changes, didn't get much traction in terms of rectifying the situation, and Seattle and most of the other cities in the state of Washington have been left struggling to figure out, okay, what do we do? We've got business owners, we've got patients, we have the goals that are stated by the voters of the state of Washington, and again, once again, local jurisdictions, local cities are left trying to figure out, okay, how do we pick up the ball? And that has led then to this question of, okay, if there's going to be a manifestation of a business, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit business, that provides medical cannabis to patients, how does that manifest in neighborhood business districts? How does it manifest in different parts of the city? And under what set of regulations should those businesses be considered? On the one hand, you will have some people who say you have no right and authority to oversee these businesses because they're illegal under federal law. And yet, I drive up and down Delridge, 15th, we drive in different parts of the city, whether it's up Aurora, Lake City, down Rainier. I took myself on my own self-guided tour of the Rainier Valley over Labor Day weekend. There are plenty of businesses out there, and we have, Councilmember Licata and I have been working with a lot of great advocates from the industry and from city staff, law department, DPD, Department of Planning and Development, Seattle Police Department, talking about, okay, we've got this business type. What should our approach be? We regulate a lot of different uses in the city. We regulate where different sizes of businesses can go. We regulate where and how something that should be a greater intensity can go in NC3 versus an NC1, for instance. We regulate when a restaurant can change into something else or change back into a restaurant. So this is consistent with the other regulations and other rules. The approach that we've taken here is, again, trying to make use of that Swiss cheese to the best extent possible and come up with a coherent approach. We don't believe that that the folks who say we can't regulate it are correct. So we're going forward with the assumption that we can regulate it like a business in the state of Washington. And the folks we've been working with say, yes, we are a business. We want to be treated like a business. We are trying to be legitimate in the way we do this operation. So bring it on. Let's talk about how to make sure that we get business licenses. Let's make sure that all the types of DPD and mechanical things are required of anybody. And let's talk about zoning. Let's talk about appropriate locations for appropriate types of businesses, the same that we do in other parts of the city. Moving from kind of a scale of types of access. You and I, should we choose to, and for all I know, someone in this room does, could grow medical marijuana for personal use in our homes right now, as long as we don't surpass certain thresholds of the numbers of plants and the amount of consumable marijuana. We, as the city, we don't believe that we should or have the authority actually to say, okay, we're going to crack down further than that and say, no, you can't do personal production, personal consumption. Where we have been interested is, okay, if you're going to set up what are, and the terminology changes and it becomes very confusing very fast, and I'm sure we'll go down a rabbit hole in a minute when I shut up. We have these things called dispensaries. They are also sometimes known as access points, and those are kind of the storefronts that people are seeing pop up. And that is something where you can have a certain number of patients band together and be clients, patients of that particular dispensary. And as long as the dispensary never goes past a certain threshold in terms of, again, the amount of consumable that's on site, or if the plants happen to be on site, that we believe we can regulate that and say where can that happen. Taking another step, you're going to have folks, and we probably do have people in the city right now, who are producing at some scale. They don't necessarily want to be the sellers, but they'd like to be the producers. That's their niche. Maybe they are growing, maybe they are taking marijuana and making it into consumables, whether that is an edible thing or a tincture or some other way that the patient consumes the marijuana. Those folks we've talked about, again, where is it proper to produce? What happens if someone wants to be in an industrial area? And looking at maximum sizes for that, 10,000 square feet, for instance, in terms of being more of a producer side. The places where we've said we actually don't think that this is a use that matches and is compatible are relatively few, but we have looked at the historic districts. And within the historic districts, including the international district as well, where we very heavily regulate uses and sign off on uses. Pike Place Market would be another place where we very heavily regulate uses and would say this is not an allowable use within the districts. In previous community meetings, some folks have brought up making sure that we preserve shoreline for shoreline uses, something I had not even thought of, but it came up in Fremont. So we'll probably go back and take a look at what's in here and make sure that it's clear that shoreline is for shoreline uses and not for agricultural development or dispensary. And the otherwise, again, the desire is to say, look, we believe that you can have, and we have been working with a group of very stand-up dispensary groups who want to also do self-policing. Not a great term, but self-policing. And so there is a move among the industry to also provide their own best practices and standards, to talk about public safety, to recognize that a well-run shop recognizes public safety as something that they need to proactively talk about, and that they need to proactively get out and work with their business districts and their communities so that people don't suspect that there's nefarious activity, but rather have a contact number, someone that they can talk to about how does this group operate, and what happens. So the idea is to make the rounds of the district councils and community clubs and chambers through probably into December of this year, and then depending on where this goes in the council, whether it goes to Councilmember Licata's committee, or there's some talk of it could come to the Economic Development Committee, my committee, we'll see. It is a zoning issue, but Councilmember Conlon's committee is pretty full up for the next few months with South Lake Union and the Shoreline Master Plan. So we're looking to figure out where it goes as a whole. So you've got the material about the zoning proposal and how we would want to approach regulation, and we hope to get feedback from people over the next couple of months and come up with a final proposal. And for the most part, the feedback that we've had so far has been that people are curious about the businesses, curious about the business model, and curious about if there are public safety issues that folks should be worried about. I will say from my own observations so far, what I read about in the paper are mostly private home-related problems, where you read about someone who has had a strong arm entry into their home, and then as you read the details a little more, you realize that it was an unfortunate knucklehead incident of someone trying to grow in their home, and not for personal consumption. Anyway, I will be quiet there. Chasm is up.
I'll probably be exposing more than I should, but so the limitations allow for up to 45 plants that could or could not be stacked vertically, which suggests that there are natural industrial areas where these might migrate. And one of my concerns would be the adequate supply of electricity. I don't know if anybody knows much about how products are grown indoors, but there's a significant draw of electricity associated with the temperature, light, and filtration controls. And those are not, those are mostly beyond what I would consider residential requirements for amperage. So that would be, I'm sure that DPD would be, or am I? Does DPD look at those kinds of things?
Absolutely, absolutely. So if someone is operating, there's certainly the sort of personal responsibility. If you're a business owner and if you're making the investment in this,
you should. Yes.
And if we create a climate in which we say, we want you to come in, we want you to actually pursue appropriate regulation and appropriate standards for mechanical, for venting,
right,
for employee safety.
Safety,
and some of those have to do with venting and mechanical, whether it is electrical or water piping, any of those things that would go into sort of an indoor agricultural use, mm-hmm, or an indoor value-added, changing an agricultural product into whatever it is that would become. Those have, you're right, those have very specific mechanical requirements.
Is there, just as a follow-up, are there areas in the city, leftover former industrial areas? I'm thinking of like Essential Bakeries neighborhood that could use an infusion of new business where, is the city also looking at that as a?
I don't know a lot about how we've been approached. It's funny, we were and I promise this is not too far off track, we were having a meeting day before yesterday looking at what we call the 108 loan portfolio. So the 108 loan is a federal loan that passes through the city, and we use it for job development. If we find someone who's looking to expand their business or move their business into Seattle, and if they're going to produce a certain number of jobs, we can provide financial assistance to that. And I jokingly said, well, how many have we had from medical marijuana so far? And Ken Takahashi is the staff person from OED, and he said, well, actually, you'd be surprised. They haven't found anybody who they can actually work with yet. But he said, oddly enough, we've been approached by a couple of people. And I didn't know if it was on the manufacturing side or dispensary side.
Well, there would be a significant, if you were going to do indoor grow, and you were going to do it correctly, there would be a significant capital investment that I would think would have a long-term payback. So.
Given where we are with local regulation and federal prohibition, I think it would be hard for us to do a 108 loan with a producer or a dispensary.
Okay, well.
But it cracked me up that people had approached us. Yeah.
Do we have other questions?
It's never really become a topic of discussion in West Seattle in the 15 years I've been here, so it's kind of it's more of a citywide issue.
Well, I'm just thinking about the zones that are left. So you've got all the NCs that are out, all of them, right?
No.
Only NC1.
So hopefully I have not misled anybody. NC1 is where we would have restrictions on the size of what you could do.
Yeah, it's a scaled approach. Is that correct?
So it wouldn't be prohibited. It would be that you are looking, again, that has to be a smaller business in an NC1.
So you could have like a dispensary in NC1.
You could do all, the equivalent of what you could do in an NC1 is that you could do enough that's basically for personal. So again, under the state rules, we don't think we can prohibit you, if you live in an NC1, we don't think we can prohibit you from doing a personal, sort of like the right word, personal grow, personal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as far as saying that's an area where we want to see and would allow the collectives to happen, so multiple dispensaries banding together, that's the scale where we would not be wanting to see that in NC1. Obviously, single family, the Pioneer Square mixed, all those areas.
And it would significantly diminish the likelihood of businesses to be located in there. The restrictions that would be put in would make it a very small mom and pop, in my opinion, if any open in an NC1.
So knowing the number of micro bakeries, et cetera, specialty food shops in this town and where they're located in what weird neighborhoods, it seems to me that would also lend itself to the THC butter industry and the whole, baked goods industry. That has to be, I looked at the numbers and it seems like that would be a lesser impact even though you might have a larger raw product. So have you all looked at that?
It's, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, so in a couple of different ways. One is, I think we will see those businesses. There was a Seattle Times article a couple of months ago about folks doing value added is the ag term for it. When Wade is selling cider at West Seattle Farmers Market, Wade is an apple guy, but he's doing cider, and cider is value added.
Right.
Well, Wade has to go through a whole lot of regulation in order to do value added, because that's going to be consumed by somebody off-site, someplace else. There are processes changing the apple into the cider. In the same way, I think we're going to see an evolution of an industry where at some point we're going to have to talk about this related to King County and health codes. We're going to have to talk about who works in the kitchen if there is a THC butter industry, like you're saying. Do they need to have a food handler's permit? They're producing a consumable item. And I would argue, if I was consuming it,
that'd be the same as a small ethnic restaurant in any neighborhood, I would think personally, in terms of food safety, the number of people that might come in contact with the product that you're working on.
Or you're right, is it akin to a small bakery?
Right.
Is it akin to a small essential bakery? Is it akin to a small macrina? Is it
Right.
akin to somebody,
well, Tallgrass, I can imagine, a totally organic approach.
The Field Roast company opened up on Jackson Street near Rainier. small producer,
Right.
in a small warehouse.
Ewan wants to see you.
And these are all questions about the future and how the industry will sort of evolve over time. And I don't think any of us know exactly what 502 will mean to this. I think, my guess is that there will still be a medical provision industry that says
Right.
we're focused on patients. We're focused on providing medicine to patients. And it may be that 502 helps that industry separate out some of the folks who are frankly not interested in providing to patients, and helps the folks who are providing to patients really be able to focus who they are, come up with those standards, and be seen as a little bit separate from what will probably manifest in these. Can you imagine how long it's going to take us to come up with state licensed marijuana stores? It took us 1998, 2008, 14 years to come to talking about zoning for medical providers, and we just voted on something that's supposed to come up with a state structure
In a
for
year.
obtaining. Yeah, I'm sure it'll happen really fast. Yeah.
So are there
Yeah.
other municipalities?
With a heavily split House and Senate, that's
Are there,
extra easy.
are there other municipalities that are at this same stage?
Really hard to find. I've been trading messages with a city council member in Denver, and he and I are still trying to compare notes. So Denver's been kind of along the same path of trying to figure out what medical access looks like, and they also just voted on a not identical but similar
Right.
message yesterday for access. So I'm still trying to connect with him. I will say one of the challenges for Seattle, for all of us, is that there are plenty of cities west and east of the mountains that are not interested in having dispensaries open up at all. And I understand a lot of the reasons why. I get the arguments about what they think it will do or who they think it will draw. It means that Seattle and the cities that are attempting to figure out a rational regulatory framework are kind of shouldering the burden isn't really quite the right phrase. I mean, because I come into this saying, look, this is about medical marijuana. The other stuff, we'll figure that out. But patients should have access, and if a city east of the mountain says, we're just going to do a moratorium.
Well, it's going to put you in a regional leadership role, whether you want it or not.
That's one way of thinking of it, yes. And regional, and again, providing a regional service and amenity that Seattle probably ends up carrying more than it should.
And national role, because
Well,
there's
yeah,
going to be
exactly.
interaction with
Yeah.
the feds on this.
I
Oh, yeah.
tend to forget
So-
things east of
Yeah.
the mountains.
So I heard actually, I was listening to KOW earlier today, and there's some discussion about the whole, initiative that passed. But one of the things that was discussed was the front door, back door
Uh-huh.
of the whole cannabis industry. So
Yeah.
so in the Netherlands, they legalized the front door, but the back door wasn't, legalized. So all the marijuana that's provided to those shops is still, not regulated. It's illegal, and so it created actually this real problem. So this is actually kind of the back door.
Yeah.
This is the back door. This is the back door issue
And
versus the front door.
we've been stuck in that place for
Yeah.
years, because again, we said, great, we want patients to have it, we're just not going to tell you how to get it.
Yeah.
And until this vote, I will say the state's still going to be nervous about this. The next governor is going to have to figure out how to talk with the feds. And one of the reasons that Governor Gregoire did the veto that she did was to say, look, I'm not going to put state employees in peril of federal prosecution. They'll be collaborating with people for the distribution and provision of a Schedule I drug.
I did have a dark thought of what happens if our federal prosecutor decides to leave town, but I've been told that her family has deep roots here, so that she's unlikely. We're talking about Durkin.
With Obama's victory, I think the U.S. attorney will probably be around for a little bit longer. Had the election gone a different way, we would be having different conversations, definitely. Well,
So does the council see, I'm always the dirty questions guy, does the council see any pushback or downside, or is the business, is the Downtown Seattle Association, is everybody, this is something that has to happen so everybody realizes that we're moving forwards logically?
that's a bit of a leading question. Let's see.
Well, I've given you a way out.
You have. I actually haven't visited DSA with this yet. We'll be talking with them at some point before the end of the year. I think we've done oh gosh. We did Southeast, Nick and I went and did a North End one 2 weeks ago. I'm at the Central District tomorrow.
The Greater Duwamish.
Oh, we did get Greater Duwamish, that was another one. Oh yeah, that's right, it was a joint Greater Duwamish Southeast.
Right, and Georgetown has its share of factories, so.
Yes, they've got some in that area. I think like any new business, you're seeing folks go where the rent is a little bit
Right, exactly,
more
they're natural
plentiful.
places.
Yeah.
Honestly, they're going right now. I work with a number of these people, often which they are struggling for direction, like we all are on the issue. And honestly, where they're going now is any place that will lease to them.
Mm.
And so I think that the zoning is a necessary component, because part of the problem that we're seeing from my side is that these people will get a house and call it a dispensary. And that's completely inappropriate for a neighborhood. I mean, you can have theft problems, you can have, traffic problems. So I really applaud what the city's been doing in trying to find areas to give these people guidance. Because with the CCSE, the Coalition for Cannabis Standards and Ethics, we hold ourselves to a code of ethical guidelines, but we can't hold everyone to them. So the more regulation, we're basically trying to hold these people together and say, look, you have to follow some guidelines. And the more leadership we get from the city, the easier it is for us to do just that.
I think the reception we've had at the district council so far has been a lot of people very pragmatic of saying, yep, the businesses are here, we should figure out how to regulate them. And also, some people saying, well, gosh, I wish they weren't in these certain areas, or I wish, I wish there was a way to, how do I know who's going in and out of there, who's coming into my neighborhood? So things that are particular to this conversation right now, but also not that different from other conversations I hear when there is a new type of business that comes up. With this one, though, yeah, one of the other things we've talked about, and one of the things that Kirkland did, was really talk about a special use license. And the special, I'm getting the terminology wrong, special use permit, that also has some other requirements on it. Show us your safety plan. If you are really engaging with the city, most of the groups that we've been
Like
talking
child care, for instance.
show us your safety plan.
Right.
If you have a product on site that is sensitive, much desired, let's
Show us
have
your
a
security
coherent
plan,
conversation
right.
about your safety plan.
Mm-hmm.
And let's make sure that the police know where you are, not from a targeting perspective, but from a safety perspective. So that they know when that address comes up, oh, okay, I know where I'm going. So we're
So
still working on some of those conversations. That's not a part of this proposal.
So when you and Nick are finished, will you have had a good survey of the city's councils and neighborhoods?
Relatively, I always feel like there are folks where.
Well, I'm just curious, this is such a new realm here that
Yeah.
this gives you a sociologically advantaged position, I think.
This is a funny conversation with folks too, because you definitely get folks who are like, well, no, this doesn't belong in our city, it doesn't belong in our neighborhoods, though last night's vote
Yeah.
indicates otherwise now.
Yeah, I want to see the demographics on that.
The number of people who say, oh yeah, my wife had cancer, and this was the thing that really helped with the nausea from the chemotherapy. Or someone who says, my cousin has MS of some kind, and for whatever reason, this is helpful. The number of people with that has really, this is probably one of those evolution things over time. It's grown as people have been more open to alternative medicines, trying different things, and a lot of people know someone who's had an experience where it's been a helpful medicine, and I think that's helped a little bit. There will be bad actors. The self-regulation and city regulation, there will be knuckleheads, there will be bad actors. It is unfortunately, marijuana is a part of a larger economy that Seattle on its own can't change.
Right. Well, just look at DEA and
Yeah.
the Border Patrol and what have you. It's astonishing. There was a deep bore tunnel between us and Canada.
Amazing. Bizarre. And our,
And yet I'm sure there's tons of it grown in Clallam County, so.
they vote for it, I can't
So the sizes that we have
Yes.
here,
Yeah, let's go back to that.
limited to, so as you indicated, that's kind of the quantities for a small mom and pop business.
Well,
But
it's-
that is the size for a viable business, effective for a
Viable-
neighborhood, or
Viable, I think, is a question.
Because it's so small.
I don't think the industry knows that it's viable at this point. I think this will be one of those things where you'll see some people try things, then some things will shake out.
But it would be, I think, a very much smaller scale because of what you're talking about, what you would need to do to actually comply with it to the point that it would be a very, very mom and pop. It would still be non-residential, but would it be viable? Not for a business that, you know, it would be a mom and pop. It would not be a profit venture.
Then these limitations are making it very difficult to set up dispensaries and such in those zones.
That's the idea. That's the idea. I will say one of the other things that the state law doesn't help us with is that there's this idea of the collective garden. You know, that provision will happen through collective gardens, which some of us think of, oh, that'll be dreamy. There'll be flowers. It'll be free. Yeah, no, not. It is a business, and there is much confusion about what constitutes a collective garden and the state not necessarily seeing, oh, but what if collective gardens band together?
Well, so when does it become a co-op, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a co-op pretty much almost immediately, because you're signing up as a patient. This is going to get us way into the details, but you're signing, and you guys will correct me, but you're signing up, say there's one that's open out on Del Ridge, opens up right next to Cuba. Sure, why not? Because sometimes it's probably a lovely area, so a lot of traffic. That you as a patient, you go in with your patient card, and you are a member of that collective for a set period of time. But then you probably go out of the collective when you're not in need of the collective, and they're able to bring another person into your place. So it's not that there are just 5 members of the collective for a 12-month run. There are 5 members of the collective, you know, this is an exaggeration, or maybe not, for 10 minutes. And then someone else is going to drop out probably.
Or less.
Or less.
There's
someone else.
different models of
Yeah.
compliance, and some of them, I mean, really the transaction time is 2 minutes. I mean, that's.
So that's like the carousel approach.
Totally. And they might go be a member of another collective, you know, the next day.
Right.
Oh my God, yeah. Oh my God.
But I mean, aggregate collective gardens allows for a little bit more, I mean, there's 7 main models that are being followed. Hopefully, I would like to see 2 no longer be viable. But I mean, the aggregate collective garden concept actually helps kind of clarify things when you get into a larger scale. But when you drop it down to a smaller scale, it makes it difficult.
I guess I don't know this, which suggests I'm not the industrial type. There must be some break point, though, between the different thresholds in terms of investment and return, no?
Well, we're hoping to find that out. No,
Or
really,
is this,
really
is that the experiment right now, is
the-
to actually figure it out?
I mean, there's different models out there, and to be honest, a lot of the models are find a place, spend no money, open your doors, do as much commerce as you possibly can, have no books, have no identity, have no nothing, because you could get closed down, and you want to have a return on that investment. Whereas when I moved into my place on 35th and Roxbury, it was expensive. I spent a lot of money on security just to make sure that I didn't bring robbery into my community. That I had a good relationship with my neighbors. However, it is much harder to realize a return on that investment. But this is something. It's an industry that is emerging, and how's it gonna go? No one knows. Never been done. And now with legalization, this is just going to be something that I'm hoping that we can find a way to get it in a logical progression, that it doesn't become a problem. because we're clearly heading in that direction.
Right. Is there anything that can be done to protect the assets of the people that are doing this? I mean, if some DEA guy comes in and decides to close shop and claim everything, there's, you know,
That is a risk.
that seems
is
a real
risk
capital
that-
investment issue there.
It's a risk that the industry folks are taking at this point.
One thing that we have been talking to, was Pete Holmes, who was at the Yes on 502
Yep.
party last night. I was talking to him, the city of Oakland, there was another city that joined in, but the city of Oakland actually sued the federal government on behalf of Harborside Health when they moved to take the, the building that it was in under civil asset forfeiture. And I think that might help the stability, so, something like that. But, I mean, the city is in an interesting position because, like, okay, the U.S. attorney and the DEA never say why they send out letters
Right.
more than a very general statement. So you really don't know, and we have to look into it to find out, okay, are these guys good businessmen? Were they dealing out the back door? Was there a reason for this? Or, so we gave up, and we do outreach, but we gave up trying to speak for everyone or trying to pull everyone in and just said, hey, look, us that are trying to do it right, we're going to stay together. And maybe by opting into a voluntary standard where you actually set yourself at a high level and are inspected, and we do inspect, and I'm certified, and I tell you it was not an easy process, and policed amongst ourselves, that maybe then that would give the city the political cover to join into a suit like that if we have if we have issue with the feds. But I think that with the U.S. Attorney, because of 502's passage last night, in the next month, you're likely to see an Obama legacy term issue a statement about how they feel about cannabis, and hopefully that will clarify things. Because if we can get that clarity
Right.
and get that surety of business, then we can have businesses that actually invest the money it takes to be successful and secure.
Is Kierlikowski still in Washington, or?
Yes. He issued a statement this morning.
So, I have just from a land use perspective,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of this is it's an interesting discussion, but from a land use perspective, if there's a consistent thing with a lot of other land use philosophy, if there's such a thing for Seattle, if we're entering kind of a post-prohibition era now, and I think about the alcohol prohibition, one of the effects of prohibition and the end of it was the emergence of these kind of giant breweries like Budweiser. And the prohibition actually killed all the small breweries, and then the emergence in the gap was filled with these large operations that, these, and only now microbrews aren't. So anyway, but if it's kind of a similar situation, I think and Seattle likes to keep small rather than, the Walmart of cannabis. That scale is a really important issue in Seattle, and that kind of removes the use a little bit. Just thinking about it in terms of how it manifests itself in different locations in the city. I think that's just another perspective.
Yeah.